Hi everyone, my name is Ben Sachs and I'm the organizer of the Ethics Cup. Thank you for volunteering your time to help make the Cup a success, to make it even possible. The Cup runs entirely on volunteer labor, and we simply couldn't do this without people like you being generous with your time. So what have you gotten yourself into? Well, you may know already, but this is an ethics discussion tournament, and what it's all about is trying to teach students a certain style of discussion and debate that displays important virtues that ideally everybody in society would display when discussing difficult ethical issues. And so it's a chance to practice certain virtues, and also a chance to have fun, and a chance to show off what you've learned about ethical issues, to show off what you've learned about philosophy and ethics and related disciplines in school. A chance to meet people from other schools and to exchange ideas. Now, this sort of central purpose of the Cup, about sort of inculcating a certain style of debate, a certain set of virtues around that can't be achieved without judges doing their job well. You are the people who make the difference between the Cup successfully inculcating this ethos and the Cup not managing to do that. So your job is really important. This video is about how to be a good judge. Overall, what we're looking for in a judge is somebody who is going to pay attention to whether the students are displaying some central virtues, whether they're being civil, open-minded, whether the things they say are fact-based. So that's what this video is going to go into some detail about. What this video will not be about is where you need to be and when, where you're going to get your score sheets, etc., etc. Things that are specific to the day of the competition and how that's going to be run, sort of the mechanics of it. All those details will be relayed to you by the organizer of the tournament at which you're volunteering. This video is going to have several sections to it. The first section is going to lay out the match format for you, and then there will be 3 sections, each one covering a different phase of the match and what your job is and how to be a good judge and what to look for in that phase of the match. Then there will be a section on how to avoid bias. And throughout the video, there will be some video clips interspersed, clips of previous matches that will give you examples of what to look out for and what to score well and what to score poorly. So we'll move on now.
I'm now going to take you through the match format and scoring. The first thing that happens after everybody in the room is seated and ready to begin is that the timekeeper runs a coin toss to determine which team will be Team A and which will be Team B. At that point, the first half of the match can begin, and that starts with the timekeeper revealing the case to be discussed. As a judge, you will not have any idea ahead of time what this is going to be, nor will the teams have any idea what the case is going to be, but the case will be selected from a set of cases that they will have seen before. At that point, once the case is revealed, the timekeeper will then begin to take the match through its phases. In the first half of the match, the team that's been designated Team A will make a presentation on the case. Then Team B will offer a commentary on that presentation. Team A then will be given the opportunity to restate their position in light of the commentary. And then there will be a dialogue period. This is where you, as a judge, will be put on the spot to ask questions of Team A based on what you've heard them say so far. And then the second half will begin. This will begin again with the revealing of a case, a new case, and then the timekeeper taking the match through its phases, just the same phases as in the first half of the match, but with teams A and B reversing their roles. you will have a score sheet in front of you the whole time. Before the match starts, the timekeeper will remind you to put your name at the top of the score sheet. That's here, of course. And once the coin toss is determined which team is Team A and which is Team B, to write their names here and here. Now, as the match goes through its phases, you are going to write in your scores from top to bottom. So the score sheet is organized chronologically from top to bottom. To help you out at the end for adding up your scores, the score sheet is also color coordinated. Everything that's shaded in blue designates points to go to Team A, and everything shaded in green designates points to go to Team B. So that should help you do your arithmetic at the end of the match. Both teams have a possibility of scoring 600 over the course of the match, and all scores are awarded in denominations of 10. And if you look at the bottom here, you can see some guidance on what a 10 is supposed to designate, what a 20 is supposed to designate, a 30, a 40, and a 50. So, just to start from the top, again, the first thing that happens in the match is, of course, the first half, and the first thing that happens in the first half of the match is that Team A offers a presentation. Your job is not to score that presentation directly out of 150, but rather to give it a score out of 50 based on 3 criteria, and then just to add up all those scores out of 50 to get a score out of 150. And then in the commentary period, your job is to offer 2 scores here, again, out of 50. And then for the restatement, 3 scores out of 50, summing to 150, a maximum of 150. And then in the question and answer period with the judges, again, 3 scores out of 50, summing to a maximum of 150. And then, of course, in the second half of the match, it's the same thing with teams A and B reversed. The only part of this score sheet that's particularly complicated is commentary scoring. So like I said, when you're actually listening to the commentary, what you're trying to do is judge out of 50 how the students are doing on 2 metrics, this one and this one. That all is very standard. That should be very familiar from what you're doing in the rest of the match. However, when the match is all said and done and you're given some time to finalize your scores, you're going to have a little bit of an extra job to do for the 2 commentary periods. That is the commentary here and the commentary here. What you're going to need to do is first create a subtotal. So just add up these scores out of 50. So some number here between 0 and 100. And then you're going to import Team A's restatement score here. So you would have come up with something out of 150 for Team A's restatement. Just take that number and put it here. That will give you a bit of an arithmetic problem to solve. You will then be taking a percentage of a score out of 150. And with that multiplication done, you'll then have another score that's out of 150. So just for the avoidance of doubt, the way it works is a commentary score, again, can be up to 150, just like the score from every other phase of the match. And the reason why it can be out of 150 is because what gets inserted here is a maximum of 150, and what it's multiplied by is a maximum of 100%, because again, right here, it's 2 scores out of 50 for a maximum of 100. So you'll just have that bit of arithmetic to do at the end of the match. I wouldn't advise trying to do it in the middle of the match. There would be no reason to rush yourself like that anyway. You'll be able to take all the time you need to do your maths at the end of the match. The only other thing to note is that on the reverse side of your score sheet, there will be blank spaces for writing comments for the teams. This isn't mandatory, but it is awfully helpful. And any comments that you write for the teams will be forwarded to them after the tournament so that they can understand what they did well, what they could work on, which is awfully helpful, of course, if they're planning to compete the following year.
What we want to do right now is talk about your role as judges and the important contribution that you'll have to the cup. The first thing that we want to discuss is what should you look for as a judge? What are the factors that you should focus on when you're making your evaluations? Now, the first important thing to note, and that we really want to emphasize, is that it's super important to prioritize substance over style. Different teams are going to come off in different ways. Some of them might be super duper polished. They might come in and appear like they're doing very well. They might have very strong speaking skills and so on. We won't be looking at those factors at all. What we really want our judges to do is focus on the scoring criteria and the scoring criteria alone. And we really want our judges to focus on those criteria and keep them as distinct as possible. It's totally possible that you can have, a presentation that does really, really well and being thorough, covers a lot of ground, lots of very interesting and fascinating ground. But the presentation might not be clear. And in that case, you might give a high mark for being thorough, but you might give a low mark on clarity. Super important to keep all the criteria distinct and mark according to those specific criteria. And paying attention to the criteria is going to be very important in prioritizing the evaluation of substance in your role as judges. What you want to do is make sure that teams are also coherent. This is going to play a role when you're marking the various different criteria. You want to make sure that teams aren't giving contradictory answers. You have to look for some stability, and you want to make sure that the different answers that students are giving really make sense in conjunction with things that they've previously stated. The next point that we want to mention, as far as your strategy as judges is concerned, is that it's very important to take notes and score as you go. Taking notes, a flowing commentary, a commentary that highlights the positive factors, the negative factors, and a commentary that has a kind of record of the different key points and arguments with all kinds of rhetoric removed is going to be very crucial in your evaluation of the round. It's going to be something you can refer back to, for example, maybe when coming up with questions, and this will be your way of also discerning how clear the teams were and so on. It's also going to be your way of trying to see what kind of position that the teams ultimately came up with. It's also very important as you're keeping this commentary and noting all the good stuff and the bad stuff to score as you go. This is, of course, practically very efficient. I remember my first time judging. I scored at the end. What I realized was, hey, it's actually really annoying to do it all at the end because there's lots of little numbers you have to fill out. But also something that we wanted to mention in particular is that memory bias is a major factor. When you're at the end of the round and you're trying to think back to the first speech, that can be very difficult, and you might not have a good, clear, coherent picture of what that first speech was like because there had been several that came up afterwards, and our memory might highlight and prioritize certain factors and certain events over others, and so you might not get a good, clean, holistic picture if you're scoring just at the end. Now, as judges, we want to look for argumentation and engagement that exemplifies the spirit of the Ethics Cup. We want to make sure that students are being good citizens and that they're really genuinely engaging with one another. Sometimes when students are being super polite to each other, we want to look for the stuff, but when they're being super polite to each other, it might just be more like lip service. And what we're really looking for is students acknowledging that, acknowledging and engaging with the opposing side by showing some genuine empathy, engagement, and so on. Now, and that's going to require a bit more than saying, aha, the other side had a very fascinating point. And respectful dialogue, in our case, it's not just finding common ground and being agreeable, or maybe just conceding things just because it might come off well to the judges. We want students to engage deeply with one another.
So the first example that we're going to go through is about defining jargon. This is something you should watch out for. Nearly every team will use some philosophical jargon in the debate, and it's really important that they define that jargon for the benefit of their opponents and for the benefit of you, the judge. So in this clip that I'm about to show you, you'll see that a team member starts talking about liberalism and then stops himself to define liberalism. If you see something like this, you should judge it as a good thing.
So we do not oppose the illiberal cultures as they've been defined, but we wish to almost integrate them into our liberal state, our liberal culture. Liberalism is fundamentally about freedom. It's about the ability to do as a person wishes.
Finally, in this next clip, you're going to see a student talking about considerations that they think would weigh heavily with an opponent. And then they go on and they express a contrary opinion, but one that they suggest will satisfy their opponent's concern. This is a really good thing. You should always be looking out to see whether the student who's speaking seems to have an understanding of why somebody would disagree with them, and that they're making an effort to offer an argument that can be understood by and appreciated by somebody who comes from a different perspective.
Although, morally speaking, she may be in the right place, thinking that companies that exploit their workers should have a reduced public market. And through this, change can be created because, obviously, if the feedback towards the company is negative due to the way they exploit their workers, they are likely to make changes. However, in the case of companies such as Deliveroo, Uber, and TaskRabbit, where the people are self-employed, this approach actually harms the people who have been employed and are working hard and are actually already having to put up with the exploitation from the company.
I'm going to talk to you now about judging the commentary. This is the phase of the match that comes immediately after the presentation, which is the bit that starts each half of the match. So the commentating team is the team that has just heard the other team give a presentation, and on the fly is coming up with something to say about it. As you'll see on the score sheet, there are two criteria on which you're supposed to give the commenting team a score out of 50. Let's go through them one by one. The first is that they're supposed to offer a good faith summary of what they've just heard the presenting team say. So the skill that we're trying to teach here is the skill of being a sympathetic and faithful representer of another point of view that one may not agree with. So we all may have disagreements with each other, but what we want students to learn here is that you can't properly offer a disagreement with a point of view until you've really tried to understand it. And the only way to know that you've really understood a point of view is to try to express it in your own words. Not only does that help you as the person offering potentially a critique, not only does that help you develop a critique that is on point, but for the team that you are going to be potentially criticizing, it helps them understand whether your critique comes from a place of having understood them correctly or comes from a misunderstanding. So again, the first thing that the commenting team is supposed to do is offer a summary of what they've heard, a good faith summary. You're there to judge it on whether it does show that they have made a real effort to understand what they've heard and to express it in their own words in a way that's faithful to and not a caricature of the position that the presenting team was trying to put forward. The second criterion on which you need to give a score out of 50 is then the actual provision of comments. So here are some things that you're going to want to keep in mind as you're listening to the comments that the commenting team offers to the presenting team. First of all, we don't want to have too many of them. The idea is that the commentary as a whole is an act of service. The commenting team is offering the service of providing feedback that would help the presenting team come up with a more defensible point of view if they were given a chance to go through it a second time, which they will be immediately after the commentary. It's not helpful if somebody tells you what their perspective on an issue is and you want to help them maybe rework it a little bit to make it better. You wouldn't just flood them with every last thought you had about what you've heard them say. You would keep it to a manageable number of comments so that they can process everything that you've said and respond to it. So again, not too many comments. As far as judging particular comments that the commenting team has offered, first thing, the comments should be on topic. Naturally, they should be responding to what the presenting team actually said, not what they might have said in an alternative universe where they had a different perspective or approached things a different way. Comments should, of course, be substantive. Obviously, comments that stray away from the substance of the issue and go into issues of, critiquing their style or how they took turns or anything like that, those would be bad comments. Of course, comments, we want comments to really contribute something new, something that the presenting team might not have thought of before. So any comments that just restate the study questions, which are of course written in the case that's distributed to the students, that would not be helpful. And then of course this is all building up to what is of course the main criterion, which is that they should be helpful. Comments should offer something, a thought, an opinion, a question, a criticism, that you could imagine the presenting team taking on board and building off of to a better statement of their position when they're given an opportunity to do so. And then the final thing, of course, I'll leave you with is that a comment should not be the presentation of another point of view. So the commentary period is not designed to be an opportunity for the commenting team to say what they think is the right position on the issue. That would be something they could prepare ahead of time and would be a much easier task. This is a really difficult task. This is a spontaneous reaction to what you as the commenting team have just heard the presenting team do. And although it may be difficult, and of course it is quite difficult, you as the judge are supposed to enforce the expectation that they will come up with something to say that is actually tailored to the very thing they've just heard the presenting team say.
This next part of the training is going to concern the dialogue period. As you know, each match has 2 dialogue periods, and in the dialogue periods, that's where you, as a judge, ask questions to the presenting team and listen to their answers. In this part of the match, we're looking for exactly the same qualities that we've been looking for in the rest of the match. It's just that we're assessing them in this slightly different way, namely by asking the students questions and listening to their answers. So there's one way, of course, to ask a question. That's by raising an objection to a position that the team took earlier in the match. And you're certainly welcome to do that. That's not the only way to ask a question. And a question can, for instance, be an invitation to the students to more fully articulate an idea that they raised early but didn't go into depth on. Regardless of what you decide to do, whether it's to ask a question or to raise an objection, there are really 4 things that separate a good question from a bad question. So I'm going to run through those now. The first thing is simplicity. You should try to keep your questions simple, because the simpler the question, the more breathing room you're giving the students to show what they know and what they've learned by researching the case. And also, of course, a question that's too complex could overwhelm the students in the heat of the moment and leave them a bit speechless, which is an unkind thing to do. So to illustrate the virtue of simplicity, please watch this next clip where you'll hear a judge asking a question about the relationship between trying to integrate a culture and opposing a culture. And you'll notice that although there's a lot more that this judge could have said to set up the question, he really just did the bare minimum and then allowed the students to come in. And that's a good thing.
Oh, you mentioned earlier this tension between integrating illiberal cultures and opposing them, and you suggested that you shouldn't oppose them, but you should try and integrate them. But you might think that integration involves, for some people, a kind of opposition. So I was wondering what your thoughts on that were and how you would kind of resolve that sort of tension between the two.
The second quality that separates good questions from bad questions is relevance. Obviously, you should ask questions that are really about the topic of the debate. And that way you're not challenging students to have answers to questions that they couldn't reasonably have been expected to think about ahead of time. In this next clip, you're going to see a judge who is asking a question during a debate that's on the topic of whether it's okay for Western nations to ban women from wearing a burqa. And you'll see that in this question, the judge asks about what would be different about a nation banning a headscarf. Now I'm offering this as an example of a good question. It's relevant enough. It's not on burqas, but it's relevant enough, and it gives a team an opportunity to display whether they've thought deeply about the issue of burqa bans.
So I'm coming from a Muslim country as well. And in Turkey, what is most traditional and what many Muslim women wear is headscarves, not burqas. So, and you think, I mean, it's much easier to put it on. It's not as heavy as a burqa is. Do you think that would create any kind of differentiation in your arguments here, or no? If we change the word burqa here with a headscarf.
The third quality that separates good questions from bad questions is fairness. You should try to ask questions of each team that are at the same level of difficulty. Some questions are more difficult than others, and that's fine. It's just that however difficult the questions are that you put to the first team that does a commentary, when the second team gets to do their commentary, try to ask questions that are roughly at the same level of difficulty. The fourth and final quality that I wanted to talk about is impersonality. So your questions should be about the issues, not about the people discussing the issues, namely the students in front of you. In this next clip, you're going to hear a judge jump in and offer a compliment to the team that's just spoken. Now, that's a nice thing to do, but it's not impersonal because it's about the team. So even if you have something nice to say, you need to bite your tongue. No compliments, no disparaging comments either. Only talk about the issue at hand.
Whereas nowadays we're so connected and so communicated that although there are instances of fake news arriving, there's probably a much larger percentage, let's say it was an event, people there to say, no, this didn't happen. There are still more voices which probably likely support against the fake news and would stop established, institutionalised fake news as well, which, you know, may be a bit positive counter to that.
Okay, thank you.
No, thanks, because I had a question precisely because I didn't think that you had answered question 2 in your original presentation, but now in the Q&A you have. So, great, and I particularly like the fact that you clearly think that it's a good thing that the fake news crisis has shifted a lot of ethical responsibility on us as consumers, on making sure that what we read is accurate, regardless of the source. So thanks, that was really good. Well done.
And now we'll talk about the issue of bias and how to avoid certain kinds of biases in judging. Now, some of the biases that may come up in judging, they might have to do with the kinds of issues or arguments being presented and discussed. But other biases may even have to do with the schools participating or with the students themselves. It's very, very natural for our minds to go in all sorts of different directions when processing information. One of the things we want to do as judges is make sure that we do our best to focus on the information that matters for evaluating the participants in these debates and discussions. So we feel that a very, very useful and good heuristic is to write down and really confront what our main biases are, especially concerning the core issues. Many of the topics discussed are current issues of controversy, and we imagine that many of you will have strong views on the issues that you'll see discussed. So if once these things are written down, it can be very useful in reflecting and checking to make sure that whatever views we already hold don't come in the way of the specific judgments we need to make on the form. So it's important to remember that we want to evaluate students on the strength of their arguments and not the views they ultimately endorse in discussion. There's another set of biases that we wanted to mention as well. Very, very much worth writing down and being very consciously aware of, which is biases concerning particular students and particular teams and particular schools. Our students come from all over the United Kingdom. Many different kinds of schools are represented from all over the nation. And some of the schools are going to be public schools, private schools. This may be apparent from the name of the schools, or perhaps different schools may have uniform requirements and so on. The students may have various regional accents and so on. So there's going to be a lot of different students from completely different backgrounds. And one of the things that's really, really important to be aware of is that sometimes our thoughts about, public schools and private schools and so on may make us consciously or unconsciously make inferences about the performance of particular students or particular teams. There might be some some unwarranted inferences there, or some irrelevant inferences there. And so one of the things to just be aware of is that what we really want to do is make sure that we take steps to avoid our thoughts about various extraneous factors, to make sure that they don't interfere with our judgments of the students participating in the Ethics Cup. So the main thing that we're looking for in our judges, and the main thing that that we're really asking of all of you, is it's not that we expect that you're going to be unbiased as a judge. There's no such thing as an unbiased judge. But what we want is a strong effort to make sure that some careful thinking and some steps are taken to make sure that particular biases don't interfere with the judgments that you need to make in scoring the various students based on their performance. We just want every judge to do what they can and take some simple steps to make sure that they judge the students as fairly as possible. And finally, we said earlier that we aren't rewarding style. So we're not rewarding speakers who are coming off as more polished and so on. Another thing to note here is that some teams might look like they have a smoother operation than others. They might seem like they have it together more. That's not something we want to look at. We want to make sure that that's not something that creeps into our judgments. And in other cases, you might see, cases where one or two students are doing more talking than others. That's also something we don't want to look at as well. We don't want to make any inferences on perceived division of labor. After all, there's a lot of work that goes on behind the scenes in preparation, and it may very well be that some of the quieter students in a particular round may be taking a leading role on other topics because of the fact that they've just had to prepare for multiple cases, and we don't really want to, make guesses about how their tasks and how they've divided things up. We don't really want to judge them there, and we don't want perceived, the perceptions to cloud our judgments on the strength of the arguments being presented.
Well, that brings us to the end of this training video. Thank you for taking the time to watch it, and thank you so much for volunteering your time to help make the Ethics Cup a success. I hope you enjoy the experience.